In today's video, join me as I attempt to fix this PS1 that has a video output issue. Recently, I bought a bundle of faulty PlayStations off of eBay, which included this PS1, which, as I mentioned before, was listed as having a video fault. So let's get this plugged in and tested so we can see for ourselves what's actually happening here. That's all plugged in now, so let's get it switched on. Okay, we can hear the sound, but there is no video, so there is definitely an issue there. Now that we confirmed that it is a video fault, I've done some Googling around, and from looking at similar issues, it seems like it might be caused by a faulty capacitor. So now let's open up the PlayStation to have a closer look at the board and see if we can spot anything. Okay, so to open this up, I need to remove these 6 Phillips head screws. This one here is usually under a void warranty sticker, which obviously it looks like someone has voided the warranty by removing this, which isn't always a great sign. But I'm going to carry on opening this up, removing the screws, and I'm not going to bore you with that process. I'll speed it up and be back when it's done. So now that the screws are out, I've just flipped it over, and the first thing I can remove is at the top of the case here. And then next I can take out this laser assembly. So if I just lift this up, and then I can remove the cables here. And this one, like that, and just put that to one side. Then I can take out the RF shield, and I can immediately see it is very grubby. I don't know how well the camera is picking it up, but there is quite a few dubious looking hairs everywhere. But I'll take this out and put it to the side as well. And then finally I can take the board out and make sure it's unhooked. And there we go. And now that the board is removed, I'm just going to get my digital microscope out so that we can take a closer look. So I've just got the board under the microscope here, and if I start moving this around, we can immediately see that there is some sort of sticky residue on the board. There's quite a bit of hair sticking to it, which would imply that something has leaked. But the capacitors I'm looking for are these two up here, C551 and C550, and they are SMD capacitors, so it is kind of tricky to tell whether they've leaked or not, but there is some sticky residue up here, and from my research I've seen that these tend to be the culprit in causing that video issue. And location wise on the board, they're both up here, here and here next to the video connector. So the next step is to get these removed. And to do that, I've got everything prepared. So I've got my hot air station here, and I've also prepared the board a little bit. I've added some aluminium tape just over the plastic connectors to protect them from the heat. And I've also added some Kapton tape over the other components. And I have added quite a bit. It might be a bit of overkill, but I guess it's better to be safe than sorry. So I've got my hot air station set to 350 degrees, and I've added some flux around the capacitor. So I'm just going to heat up the solder and then lift it off. So now that the first one's off, let's get the second capacitor removed. Okay, so both of those capacitors have now been removed. I'm pleased to say, because honestly I was a bit worried about doing this because I don't have much experience removing SMD capacitors, but it only took about 40 seconds of heat for each one, and they both lifted straight off. And now it is time to clean the pads. So I've got some solder wick here, and I've also just added a chisel tip to my soldering iron to make it a bit easier. The pads are now clean. I've just wiped them down with some IPA as well, as you can see here. And the next step to prepare for the replacement capacitors is to tin the pads. So I've got my soldering iron heated up to 350 degrees, and I've also added some flux to the pads as usual. So I'm just going to do that now. So now we can move on to the next step, actually soldering the replacement capacitors to the board. So I have raided my supplies, and whilst I couldn't find any SMD capacitors that match, I have managed to find these 220 UF 16 volt through hole capacitors that are a good enough match to the 4 volt 220s that I removed. But one thing that is worth checking is the capacitance, because I have two different types of capacitors here. I've got some cheap ones and then also some higher quality ones. You can see that the cheap capacitor is showing up as almost 270 UF, and the higher quality one is coming up as a 224, which is a lot closer to the 220 UF that they're labelled as. So those are the ones that I'm going to be using today. But before I begin soldering, I did just want to mention that I haven't given the board a good clean, as you can see in the photo here, just using some distilled water and baking soda to remove the residue left by the leaking capacitors. So to help with the soldering, I've just used a little bit of blue tack to hold the capacitors into place, with the negative side the short leg on the right, like it was on the SMD capacitors that I've removed. And as usual, I've also added a bit of flux. So I'm going to get these soldered and I'll be back when that's done. Okay, so that's all soldered, and I've also just trimmed down the legs and given it a bit of a clean with some IPA to remove the flux. So now we can give it a test and see if changing them has fixed any of those video issues. So now it's the moment of truth. I'm going to switch it on. And oh, it appears to be working. I am kind of shocked about that. It seems like just replacing those capacitors was all it needed. And while it is working, I'm just going to check that there is no other issues by loading a game. So I'm pleased to say that I've checked it out and the game is loading fine, and the controller works as well, as you can see with Resident Evil here. And I will say I am very happy that it all works with just a simple recap, and now that I know it works, I've ordered a full set of SMD capacitors so that I can recap the whole console. And in terms of the other consoles that came in that bundle, I have this PS2 here that has a laser issue and a PS1 that has a power fault. So definitely let me know in the comments if you'd like to see videos of me repairing those, and also any other consoles you'd like to see me try and repair. But that's all for today. I'll see you next time.